Good morning. This is Dr. Mike, and I'm really excited to be at the start of this class on American history from first discovery to the Civil War, roughly. Uh, there are a couple of things about the terminology I wanted to mention, and that is that word discovery. We now know that there were many people that made it to the Americas before Christopher Columbus, and so that word is not quite accurate. Discovery by Columbus might be more accurate. And so we really realize our terminology might be a bit limited when we talk about that. Realize that Columbus's discovery of America then was not really a discovery, but a rediscovery. There are several things that fueled Columbus's coming, and of course fueled the age of exploration that happened because of his coming, that I just wanted to mention to you. And to do that, we have to go back probably to 1000, around the time of the Crusades, and you realize that there wasn't a lot of travel around what was known of the world at that point in time because of poverty and not a lot of money and things to travel with. And so that travel became inspired by the Crusades when the Pope asked Christian nations in Europe to come and to actually take the pressure off of the eastern part of what was the Roman Empire, from the invading Turks and other of the hordes that were moving to the west from Asia and putting a lot of pressure on them. But as it turned out, the call that was made, and of course you have to, as we know, you market every war. The marketing tool was that they were coming to free the Holy Land from the infidels. Now, one of the interesting things about that is the words that we use today, when we talk mainly about Muslim and terrorist, all this, are infidels. And that vocabulary was Christian before it was Muslim. They talk about us being infidels. It was Christian before it was Muslim. And they borrowed that from us and took a lot of things from us in that vein. So the recruitment for the war then was to go and to free the Holy Land from the Turks and from the Muslim infidels as they saw them. There were 5 crusades. The first one was probably the most successful. And then, of course, there was the Children's Crusade, where a number of children, this kind of nutty priest said that he had a dream and that the Holy Spirit had revealed to him that if he took just children, that the enemy would lay down their arms and surrender to them. And of course, that was a terrible story. Number one, as a parent, you can imagine letting your children go off to far-flung places. And this is quite a great distance. This is not some walk in the park. It took months to get there by travel. But these kids were kidnapped and sold into slavery. There's all kind of things that were total disaster. But at any rate, the point I want to make is that this travel to the Middle East spurred trade because of the things that these Christians became exposed to. One of those was coffee, and the other was sugar. Coffee was an Arab drink, and in fact, they liked it so well that the Pope placed a blessing on coffee so that Christians could drink it, because it was the drink of infidels, as they called it. And interestingly enough, the first coffee shops, the first Starbucks, if you were held all over the Middle East, and people met there to talk business, to drink coffee, to enjoy fellowship together. And so the idea for Starbucks became important very early on. And so I have a paper I wrote on how Starbucks led the discovery of America, because it was basically that. And so the Christians returning brought back coffee, brought back sugar, which they had not been widely exposed to. And so there began this trade between Europe and the Middle East in coffee, sugar, spices, up until 1200, when Saladin, the Turk, closed the door and said, "No more coffee for you, no more sugar for you." And so this shifted the trade route then from Jerusalem to Constantinople, or Istanbul as it's called today, overland. And so by 1200, you have Marco Polo going all the way to China on that route. And so that went on until 1453 with the fall of Constantinople, and the Muslim armies took over the city. And of course, that was the end of the coffee trade. So we're within 40, 50 years of Columbus. We're now 1453, he's 1492. And so, as I jokingly say, the drive for, this coffee withdrawal drove people to want to find it another way. And so they came up with this idea by that time, and here's an important point that is often misquoted and mistaught, was that Columbus did not know the earth was round and there was a fear of sailing off the end of the earth. That was a false statement. Excuse me. That came about because of Washington Irving's book about Columbus in the late 1800s. All these false things that we tend to teach came from that book. It's not true. They knew by 1493 that the earth was round, and so they were surmising that if they sailed west, they would reach the east and, of course, get to their spices. Excuse me. So at any rate, Columbus discovers, quote unquote, America. The other thing that's important to understand in this prehistory kind of class that we're talking about now, number one is to understand what history is. There is no a history of America or the history of America. There are many histories of America. If 5 historians walked out onto the battlefield and surmised a battle, say the Battle of Thermopylae, they would all pick up on certain different aspects that they're interested in and bring them back to their place of writing and all write different histories. There would be one main theme usually, but many histories. And so there are many histories of America. And of course, Benjamin Franklin says we have a civic history, which is the history you took in high school, because the things that we'll learn here, many of you will say, well, we didn't learn that in high school. There's so much more to it than what we learned in high school. That was the civic history. Benjamin Franklin said, it is a tale we tell ourselves about ourselves, and we believe it. And of course, we want to look beyond the civic history and look at the real story of what really happened. And so we're going to be looking at lots of different things. Another thing about Columbus I wanted to mention to you was the journals that he kept. Now, remember, we're at 1492. We're right on the cusp of Gutenberg's movable type. Gutenberg did not invent the printing press. He invented movable type. We borrowed the printing press, as we tend to do in the West. In the West, we don't invent much, but we borrow things or steal them, quote unquote, from other cultures, and we improve them. We have this ability to innovate, and that's really important. If you look at Japan, you get a great idea of that. When Japan was defeated by the atomic bomb in the end of World War II, Douglas MacArthur actually sent back a letter to American Christians and said, look, if you want to ever win these people for Christ, send me 5,000 missionaries, because their religion is destroyed. They worship the emperor. When he was defeated, there was this huge vacuum there. Churches did not do that. And as a result, the Japanese just adopted what they considered to be our God, which was innovation and technology. And they have this innate ability to take something and improve it as they go. I'll give you a personal experience. I worked for one of the largest companies in the world in the 70s, Schlumberger. We built power factory capacitors in our little factory in Pickens, South Carolina. And they wanted to send Japanese engineers over to look at what we were doing. Well, you got to remember, that was before cell phones, that's before all these cameras and everything. So they wouldn't let them have any technology in hand. And so they sent people with photographic memories who came through our factory, looked at what we did, went back to their room, and they drew what we were doing. And as they drew it, they improved it and put us out of business. They learned that from us, that they learned that act of innovation. Well, at any rate, the movable type was going to spur the age of exploration in Europe, because these journals that these sea captains are going to keep are going to be taken home and going to be published and read all over Europe. So whatever attitude that captain takes against the people he encounters or the things that go on there will be published, and people will pick that up. For one thing, in his journal, he talks about these noble savages and about how they're made and how they look and all these things, and what they're wearing and what they do and all these things. And it's interesting because, remember, Columbus is looking at these natives for the first time through a European lens. So when he looks at the men, he says they're naked, they don't wear any clothes. That wasn't necessarily true. except they weren't wearing European clothes. And so he judged people by their dress, much like we do today. You know, if you see, there are some Christians that if you see a lady in a pair of slacks, then she's something less of a Christian because she's not wearing the dress. So you see that how that's done. He criticized the men for going out hunting and fishing all day, and the women staying home and keeping the gardens and raising the kids and keeping home. That the men were lazy and indolent, because in Europe, when you went out to hunt and fish, it was recreation. It was not a matter of bringing home protein for your family to eat. And he said they'll make good servants. These will make good slaves. That's exactly what they did. He also said, I don't see any, they have no religion, because he didn't see a cross or a Bible. That was his standard. And so basically they converted the natives at the edge of the sword, put them to work in gold and silver mines, and worked them to death, actually. And so as you move forward in the 1500s, they have literally wiped out a race of people. Europeans, and us included, were guilty. If we had a war crimes tribunal in the 1800s, America would probably be charged with genocide of wiping out Native Americans. There were 10 million Native Americans, we think, at the time of Columbus. We were down to less than 300,000 by 1889, when we get to the Battle of Wounded Knee, which was the end of the Indian resistance. And so all those people died. Number one, the Europeans brought diseases that killed them because they had no immunity. Immunity, by the way, you get from domesticated animals, and they had no domesticated animals. They had no horses, no chickens, no pigs. All that came from Europe. And so it's going to rapidly change their lives. But at any rate, in the mid-1500s, they send Queen Isabella a letter, and they say, we have killed off all the natives. We worked them to death, and we have nobody to work. Where should we get laborers? And so she says, go to the Bahamas and get those. And they went there. They'd already worked them to death in sugarcane fields, making sugar. They write again, and she says, go to Africa and bring Africans. This is the first time African slaves come to America, and most of them always went to South America. There's an interesting site called the Slave Trade Database, where they have track of every ship that brought slaves from Africa, how many were on it, how many men, women, and children, how many died at sea, where they went to, where they unloaded, what they were sold for, everything. You can look at all of that. And most of the slaves, all through slavery, went to Brazil and South America. So a smaller percentage came to America. Interesting that slavery becomes such a huge issue to us by the end of this course, but we realized that slavery was not the driving force in the world, that it was in another place, not in America. Ours just took kind of precedence. So this mistreatment of natives, got the attention of a few Catholic priests, and they wrote to the Pope, and he put out two very interesting cyclicals that we need to just let you know about and address. In 1493, he passed a papal bull that said that any heathen lands occupied by non-Christians that were savages, that was the key word, could not hold their land. They had no right to it because the land was given to Christians, and so savages had no right to it. And so it was free for the taking. And he basically gave Spain all the New World except for Brazil, which he gave to Portugal. In the mid 1500s, he came back with another papal bull and reinforced this idea of savages not owning land. Now, interestingly, by 1550, we're in the middle of the Protestant Reformation, when churches are leaving the Catholic Church. But this is one doctrine that they will hold on to, even in Protestant lands like England. They will hold on to this theory that savages could not hold land. And so they branded these people as savages, sometimes noble savages, but that the wording is so important, because then that puts it under the guise of the Pope's bull, and they could take the land. England would do this in Ireland, because Ireland would not leave the Catholic Church when they split in the mid-1500s with Henry VIII. And so the first thing they did was begin to talk about these people in Ireland being savages, because they would eat the body and blood of Jesus in the Mass. And so they began to take their land and settle the Scots people in Ireland. That's where the Scotch Irish came from, that many of us are related to, myself included. And they would immigrate eventually to North America as Scots Irish. And so that meant they came from Ireland, but they were Scottish replants that the British put there to try to remove the Irish from their land. And that's what this war that has gone on all the way up into the present time, and I don't have time to talk about it, with Sinn Féin and others between the Irish and the British, is largely all about. And so that papal bull was quite important. So Spain is going to mine tremendous amounts of gold and silver from what we now call South America. There's a great book called Rivers of Gold. If you like to read, I encourage you to read that about all these things I've talked about. There was so much gold that the Spaniards eventually set up a minting operation in St. Augustine, which is the oldest city in America. And they would go ahead and mint the Spanish coins, load them on the ships. And of course, we keep finding ships that sank. In fact, one was found just a few weeks ago off the coast of Florida that still had all of these Spanish doubloons on it and coins. So you see, this is a big ongoing thing. So basically, the different countries will have different experiences in settling. The Spanish will come here mainly men and come here with conquering on their minds. And of course, I teach a course in Southwestern history, and we touch on the Spanish again, who take most of the Southwest or actually travel there, and they may intermarry with the population, so that it's rare to find below the Rio Grande true natives that don't have some Spanish blood. The French will come looking for a route around this continent, which they didn't expect to be here, still trying to get to the east to get spices. And they go down the St. Lawrence River, get into the fur trade. And interestingly enough, their treatment of Native Americans is probably the best, if that's possible, of all the European nations. They literally take the time to teach Native Americans their Roman Catholic religion and convert them and treat them with a little bit more respect. And notice I'll qualify those words. The English come late, and they come as families because they're escaping religious persecution. And so they come as families, which sets up another dynamic with Native Americans because of the fear of these savages. And we'll talk more about that when we get to the Pilgrims. Some very interesting things about them. So I just want to share some foundational things with you. This is my passion, this part of the history, so I really love it. And I hope you will leave with a changed view and a changed attitude towards American history, because it's a weapon today. It's being used as a weapon to try to prove that America was a Christian nation, or it was not. I tend to come down on the latter side, and I'm sorry if that doesn't impress you, but I have studied this stuff for 40 years, and our founding fathers were all kinds of religious people, and they were not necessarily Christian. America has never been a Christian majority, because in the beginning, you had the Native Americans here, and they were not Christian, so they far outweighed any other group. So you cannot say that that America was ever Christian majority. The closest it ever came to was probably the First Great Awakening. So anyways, that's just my opinion. You don't have to accept that, but you do need to study for yourself, be able to answer your own questions, and not to say, well, Dr. So-and-so said that, and so I believe it. No, find out why you believe it. And as you do your discussion boards, you want to write more than just a minimal amount. You want to discuss issues that come up that are in the discussion, and also those of your classmates find something they say of interest and build on that. Well, that's enough for this week, and I appreciate your attention, and we will carry this on next week in our conversation. Thank you so much.